Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Stolen Mind, an Honoring Audiobooks original story from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D. Chapter 1, The Man in the Red Fog. It was upon a singularly cold and brooding morning in early October of the year 1892 that the adventure, which I have entitled The Case of the Stolen Mind, first revealed itself to Mr. Sherlock Holmes and myself. The London fog had taken on a reddish hue, filtered as it was through the soot of 1,000 chimney pots, and Baker Street wore the melancholy aspect of a street in mourning. The gas lamps, already weary from their overnight vigil, flickered uneasily against the dawn like uncertain sentinels. I remember the sound of hoofbeats smothered beneath the fog, and the way the lamplight turned to molten gold upon the wet cobbles. Holmes had risen early. I found him seated in his favorite armchair near the fire, one leg crossed over the other, a long Turkish cigarette trailing a ghostly curl of smoke, and his sharp profile outlined like a Greek bas-relief against the curtain's edge. Upon the small table at his elbow lay a sheaf of telegrams, a pair of tongues still gripping a half-burned lump of coal, and the remains of a cold partridge which I suspected had never reached a plate. "You are brooding," said I, rubbing my hands before the hearth and settling opposite him. "I am listening," Holmes corrected, tapping a long finger against his temple. "The city speaks, Watson. The cabs wheel past with unusual haste, and that is the third newspaper boy to cry extra in the space of 10 minutes. There is news afoot." I moved to the window and peered out. The fog is thick as soup. I can barely see beyond the next door. "Indeed," said Holmes. "And yet, what do you hear?" At that moment, a sharp knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson, no doubt already annoyed at having her morning routine disrupted, entered with a card upon a silver tray. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she said. "He's very pale and quite beside himself." Holmes took the card and studied it with one eyebrow lifted. "Dr. Alaric Fenwick, of Harley Street, a notable psychologist of considerable repute, though, I confess, his theories on mnemonics and the subconscious are rather avant-garde, even for my taste. Show him in." Moments later, a tall, angular man entered the room. His dark overcoat was damp with the mist, and his eyes had the startled brightness of a man who had witnessed something no man ought to. He was perhaps 50, though the streaks of gray in his temples and the tremor in his hands aged him prematurely. "Mr. Holmes," he began, "you must forgive this intrusion. I was an associate of Dr. Gideon Eddington." Holmes motioned him to sit. "Dr. Eddington, I have heard his name. A pioneer in the study of the mind. Indeed, sir, he was more than that. He was brilliant. Genius is not a term I use lightly. He believed, nay, proved that memory is not merely a passive storehouse, but a malleable instrument. He could extract, alter, even implant recollections." Holmes leaned forward, interest kindled. "A bold claim, Doctor, but why do you say was?" Fenwick swallowed hard. "Because last night, Gideon Eddington was found dead, shot in his study. The police believe it was suicide." Holmes rose abruptly. "You do not share that belief." Fenwick shook his head violently. "No, and neither would you had you seen the room. His work, his notes, his journals, gone, burnt or stolen, and his revolver, though lying beside him, had no powder burns. The angle of the wound, it is all wrong. I am not a detective, but I know when something is amiss." I said, "Perhaps he destroyed his work before taking his life?" "No, Dr. Watson," Fenwick replied. "Gideon valued that work above his own existence. He would never have destroyed it." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And you say the journals are gone?" "Every last one. His desk was rifled, cabinets forced. The manuscript he was preparing for the Royal Society vanished, as if someone wished to erase all trace of his theories." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, fetch your coat. We are going to Harley Street." The journey was swift, our cab cutting through the fog like a ship through spectral seas. By the time we arrived at Nobigerly, 17 Harley Street, a small crowd had gathered beyond the wrought iron gate. A constable stood watchful at the entrance, and I noted the presence of Inspector Gregson speaking with a young man who wore the livery of a private valet. "Gregson," Holmes greeted him. "It seems you have arrived before me for once." "Ah, Holmes. Morning, Dr. Watson. Nasty bit of business. Dr. Eddington, a mind like a razor, or so they say, found slumped over his desk with a bullet through the skull. Gun was found in his right hand." Holmes knelt by the gate's edge and peered at a muddy footprint. "And yet the man was left-handed, was he not?" Gregson blinked. Was he? I confess I hadn't thought to ask. I did, said Fenwick. He wrote exclusively with his left. Curious, said Holmes, rising. Let us see the scene. The study was a large oak-paneled chamber lined with bookshelves and dominated by a vast mahogany desk. Eddington's body had been removed, but the outline upon the carpet was unmistakable. There was a single bullet hole in the paneling behind the chair. On the desk sat a half-finished letter, ink still blotched, addressed to A. The contents were little more than a scrawl. They are in my head. I see now what I should not have seen. The mind. Holmes examined the desk with the delicacy of a surgeon. He drew out a small magnifying glass and inspected the lock. Forced from the outside, he murmured. And look here. Wax shavings. A seal? I asked. A sealing of some private document, perhaps, but more importantly, there is dust where dust ought not to be. He pointed to an empty space on the lowest shelf. A volume was removed recently. Look at the outline left in the grime. A large book, perhaps a ledger or journal. We were interrupted by a cry from the hall. A woman in a dark veil had entered, her hands clenched tightly around a velvet reticule. I am Helena Vexley, she announced. Dr. Eddington's assistant, I heard. You were expected, said Holmes smoothly. Please, madam, sit. Did you have access to the doctor's research? She hesitated. Not directly. He was secretive of late, especially since the incident with Mr. Rayner. Holmes's eyes lit up. Rayner? First name? Lysander. A patient of considerable notoriety. He was one of Dr. Eddington's earliest subjects, a gifted pianist. He became unstable. Define unstable, Holmes pressed. She looked away. Violent. He attacked a fellow patient during a session. He claimed Dr. Eddington had stolen his memories, that his past was no longer his own. He was committed to Wandsworth Asylum a month ago. A curious place to house such a man, Holmes said. We shall visit him. But it's not safe, she protested. He's dangerous. All the more reason, Holmes said with a thin smile. Danger has a curious habit of revealing truth. The Wandsworth Asylum was a grim institution of blackened brick and iron gates, a place where the city stored its unwanted minds. We were admitted by a gaunt matron whose voice held no music, and were led to a dim cell at the end of a stone corridor. There sat a man in a straight-backed chair, his eyes fixed upon the ceiling. He was perhaps 35, with wild hair and hands that trembled as if conducting some ghostly symphony. Mr. Rayner, Holmes said, do you remember Dr. Eddington? Rayner's head turned slowly. His voice was a rasp. He is dead. Yes, how did you know? I dreamed it, said Rayner. I saw the blood, heard the shot, smelled the ink. Holmes knelt. What did he do to you? He took them, Rayner whispered. The memories. He stole the colors from my childhood, the laughter, the music, replaced them with ash. But I remembered. In the end, I remembered. Did you kill him? I asked. Rayner laughed. But someone did. Someone who saw what he did to me. Someone who knew how to use what he created. His work lives on. He leaned closer, but not in the way he hoped. Holmes rose and turned to me. Watson, the game is afoot. We are not hunting a mere thief or murderer. We are pursuing a ghost, a shadow armed with the power to erase truth itself. And as we left the asylum, the red fog of London seemed to thicken, as though the very air conspired to conceal the secrets buried in the stolen mind. Chapter 2. The Scent of a Phantom. It is a singular thing to witness Sherlock Holmes when his mind is piqued, not merely engaged, but ignited, like phosphorus to flame. The morning after our initial visit to the late Dr. Alaric Mortenson's study had brought no clarity, and Holmes had paced the drawing room of Baker Street like a wolf kept from the kill. I had just returned from a brisk walk along Marylebone Road, the air crisp with January frost. Mrs. Hudson, ever the steward of domestic order, had pressed upon me a scone wrapped in a linen napkin, which I now clutched in one hand as I opened the door to the sitting room. Holmes stood at the window, his thin figure stark against the pale, gray light that filtered through the lace curtains. His violin rested untouched on the settee, an unusual neglect for him at this hour. "You've been at it all night," I remarked, removing my gloves. "You'll drive yourself into a stupor if you don't rest." "Rest?" he replied, not taking his eyes from the street. "Watson, a man's mind has been stolen." Quite literally. One cannot rest while such a question lies unresolved. I frowned. "You believe the research existed then?" "I do not simply believe it," he said, finally turning toward me. His eyes were sharp, alight with a ferocity I had come to both admire and dread. "I am convinced of it. Mortenson's mind was not only remarkable in its scientific capacity, it was also exceedingly dangerous to the wrong hands. And someone, my dear Watson, has taken both the man and his mind." He gestured to the small writing desk near the hearth, upon which were stacked various reports, letters, and telegrams. One had been opened and neatly flattened, a missive from the office of the coroner. "Officially ruled a suicide," Holmes said. "No powder burns. Bullet to the temple. Locked room. And yet—" He walked to the hearth, picked up the poker, and prodded the fire with impatience. The lock had been jimmied and reaffixed. Poorly, I might add. The maid's testimony places a single visitor 2 days prior, one Mr. Elias Greaves, a former patient. "Greaves?" I furrowed my brow, drawing on memory. "Wasn't that the name on the framed photograph atop the mantel in Mortenson's study?" "Precisely," said Holmes with the kind of grim satisfaction that he reserved for connections no one else had yet made. "The same Greaves who, according to the patient logs now in my possession, donated by an anonymous nurse at St. Agatha's Asylum, was released from care 2 months ago, deemed stable." I blinked. "You suspect him of murder?" "I suspect him of being intimately acquainted with Mortenson's final days," Holmes replied. "And in such affairs, Watson, intimacy often precedes blood." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper, stained slightly at the edge. "This was found tucked inside Mortenson's desk, beneath a false bottom. The constables overlooked it." I took the paper and read aloud. "To manipulate the self is to alter the nature of the soul. I have seen it, touched it. Memory is not fixed. It is clay. Greaves is the key and the lock. If I vanish, seek the mirror." I looked up. "The mirror?" Holmes smiled grimly. "Indeed, Mortenson's study mirror was quite new, yet its frame bore signs of age. And beneath the backing panel, I found this." He strode to the small bureau and produced a tiny, cloth-bound notebook. Its pages were inscribed in a delicate, frantic hand. Scribblings, diagrams, repetitive lines. One page in particular caught my eye. "What is remembered is not what was. It is what is made to be remembered." Chilling words even without context. I handed it back. "Could it be notes on hypnosis?" Holmes shook his head. "More than that. I believe Mortenson discovered a method by which memory could be implanted, not merely suggested. And if that is so—" He trailed off, as though the implications were too vast to be uttered aloud. At that moment, there came a knock at the door. "Ah," said Holmes, glancing at the clock. "Right on time. That will be Inspector LaRue." The inspector, a gaunt man with a silver-flecked beard and eyes that missed little, entered with the air of one who bore unpleasant news. "Holmes," he said by way of greeting. "Dr. Watson." "LaRue," Holmes nodded. "You've come with developments, I trust." LaRue removed his gloves and sat in the chair opposite the hearth. "Of a sort. The Mortenson case has been closed at the Yard, officially, but unofficially there is unease." "Among whom?" "The coroner," LaRue said. "His assistant, a young woman named Miss Thalia Yates, found inconsistencies. The angle of the bullet, for one. The presence of copper residue on Mortenson's temple. She suspects the weapon was pressed against him post-mortem." Holmes steepled his fingers. "A planted scene. Curious." "There's more," LaRue added, producing a small envelope. "This was delivered to Scotland Yard yesterday. No return address. Postmarked from Limehouse." Holmes took the envelope, opening it with delicate fingers. Inside was a single scrap of thick paper. On it, written in tight, almost mechanical script. "You seek the truth, but minds can lie. Ask the man with no memory." Watson and I exchanged a glance. Holmes exhaled through his nose. "Limehouse," he murmured, "the seediest underbelly of London, where the truths are as filthy as the river." LaRue nodded. "I can arrange a guide if you intend to investigate." Holmes waved a hand. "No need. I know the alleys, and I know the man to see." "Who's that?" I asked. Holmes turned, and his face bore a look that chilled me. "Silas Nett," he said. "Fence, smuggler, information broker, and once Mortenson's patient." We set out that afternoon, the sky the color of pewter, with a wind that cut through wool and bone. Limehouse was a different world from Baker Street, a maze of damp stone, rusting iron, and buildings that leaned as though conspiring. The air smelled of opium, oil, and river rot. Our destination was a dilapidated building off Milligan Wharf, its door marked only by a faint symbol scratched into the wood, A serpent coiled about an eye. Inside, the gloom was total until Holmes lit a lantern. The corridor beyond opened into a room filled with books, maps, and curiosities of dubious origin. At the center, lounging in a high-backed chair like a king among thieves, sat Silas Nett. He was a lean man, dressed in a threadbare waistcoat, with hair like a bird's nest and eyes too bright to be sane. "Well, if it isn't the great Holmes," Nett drawled, "and Dr. Watson, if I'm not mistaken. The soldier and the sleuth, what brings you to my humble theater of crimes?" "Memory, Silas," Holmes said evenly, "and the theft thereof." Nett raised a brow. "Still hunting ghosts, then?" Holmes didn't blink. "You were a patient of Mortenson's. He's dead. His research is missing. You know who might want it." Nett laughed, and the sound was like broken glass. "Want it? Holmes, everyone wants it. Politicians, foreign agents, hell, even some of the aristocracy. Memory is power, and Alaric Mortenson had found the switch." "You speak as though you've used it," I said. Nett's smile thinned. "Let's just say I don't dream anymore, Doctor. Not because I don't want to, but because I no longer remember how." A silence fell. Holmes studied him. "Greaves," he said. "Where is he?" Nett's laughter stopped. "Ah, the phantom." "So he is alive," Holmes said softly. "Alive? Oh, yes, but not the man Mortenson knew. Elias Greaves was rewritten too many times. He cracked." "Where?" Holmes asked. Nett leaned forward. "Look for the flame in the fog, Holmes. Seek the house that burns without fire, and mind the mirror, for in it you may not like what you see." As we stepped out into the gathering dusk, I turned to Holmes. "What did he mean by that?" Holmes paused, looking toward the river where fog curled like smoke over water. "He meant," Holmes said slowly, "that Greaves is more than just a murderer. He may be something Mortenson created. And if he's rewriting minds—" "Yes," Holmes said darkly, "he may already be rewriting others." The fog swallowed his words, and the case, already terrible, had only just begun. Chapter 3. The House That Burns Without Fire. It is a curious sensation, descending into madness by means of logic. Holmes, more than any man I have known, wielded rationality as both sword and shield. And yet, in the weeks I spent alongside him on this singular case, I began to suspect that our enemy was not a man at all, but the unraveling of reason itself. The fog had deepened by the time we returned from Limehouse, curling thick and damp about the handsome cab like wool soaked in gin. Holmes sat in silence beside me, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes half-lidded, but far from idle. I recognized the posture. His mind was working at a furious pace, leaping from fact to deduction, deduction to hypothesis, all while outwardly appearing at rest. It was only when we arrived at Baker Street that he stirred. "Watson," he said as the cab came to a halt, "I shall need you to pack a small bag. Warm clothing. Bring your revolver and my second notebook, the one bound in green leather." I blinked. "Where are we going?" "To the coast," he replied. "Norfolk, to be precise. There is an estate some 5 miles from the town of Blakeney, a place called Ashcroft Hollow. Once a private asylum, now converted into a therapeutic retreat under the name of St. Florian's. It is there, I believe, we shall find our phantom." "Greaves?" Holmes nodded. "And perhaps the mirror that Mortenson warned us of." The journey to Norfolk took the better part of the following day. We departed on the morning train from Liverpool Street and traveled through gray, wind-blown countryside, arriving in Blakeney beneath a bruised sky and the constant cry of gulls. The local station master, a man with more mustache than sense, directed us to a public house known as the Mariner's Flask, where we procured lodging under assumed names, Mr. Templeton and Mr. Gray, at Holmes's insistence. "You expect trouble?" I said as we settled in. "I expect observation," Holmes replied. "Greaves may be watching for us. It is safer that he not know we've come." We dined early, boiled haddock and bitter ale, and by twilight we were on the road once more, bundled against the cold and trudging along a winding path that led from the village proper into the hills beyond. Ashcroft Hollow emerged as a silhouette against the dying light, a great, brooding structure of red brick and ivy-stained stone, its gables jutting like horns against the sky. An iron gate, twisted and rusted, marked the entrance. Beyond it, a circular gravel drive led to a door flanked by 2 gas lamps that flickered weakly against the wind. Holmes stopped just shy of the gate, kneeling to examine something in the mud. "Boot prints," he murmured. "One set, recent. Heel worn on the right. The gait is heavy, likely a man of medium build. Perhaps a guard. "Do we knock?" I asked. Holmes looked up at me, a flicker of amusement in his eye. "We infiltrate, Watson. Knocking would announce us as guests. Tonight, I prefer to be an apparition." We skirted the property, staying low among the hedgerows until we reached the eastern side of the estate, where a low stone wall separated the grounds from a line of ash trees. With the agility of a much younger man, Holmes scaled the wall and extended a hand to help me over. We crouched among the brush, waiting. Somewhere within, a door slammed. A dog barked, briefly, then fell silent. "There!" Holmes whispered, pointing to a narrow window on the ground floor. "A service entrance." The latch gave way with little resistance. We slipped inside. The hallway was dark. Save for a faint light spilling beneath a distant doorway, the air was thick with a smell of medicinal alcohol, coal smoke, and something else. Something metallic and sweet. We moved silently. Holmes ahead, his steps ghost-like. I behind, clutching my revolver. At length we came to a door slightly ajar. Holmes pushed it open. The room was a study, though it bore little resemblance to Mortenson's dignified chaos. This was sterile, ascetic. Shelves lined the walls, but instead of books they held rows of metal canisters and jars filled with translucent liquid. Desks bore instruments I did not recognize. One resembled a phonograph merged grotesquely with a stethoscope. Another looked like a helmet of brass filigree and wires, suspended over a reclining chair. "What is this place?" I whispered. "An echo of Mortenson's mind," Holmes replied. "Look, notes." He stepped forward and lifted a sheaf of paper from the desk. I peered over his shoulder. The writing was sharp, almost frantic. Subject number 12 displays increased compliance after third immersion. Identity fracturing evident. Memory strand implanted successfully. Subject recalls events which never occurred. I felt a cold sweat gather at my nape. "Holmes," I said slowly, "this isn't therapy. It's manipulation, brainwashing." Holmes nodded, eyes narrowed. "The mirror, Watson. Mortenson's mirror? It was not a metaphor. It was a device. And I believe Greaves has built his own version here." At that moment, a sound reached us, a soft humming, rising in pitch. Then, a voice. "Why are you in my house?" We turned. The man who stood in the doorway was tall and thin, his face gaunt and pale. But his eyes were ablaze with something terrible. Recognition and madness danced together in those irises like twin flames. "Elias Greaves?" Holmes said quietly. The man smiled, a crooked, joyless expression. "I was wondering when you'd come, Mr. Holmes. I've been expecting you." Holmes raised his hands calmly. "You've gone to great lengths to hide, Mr. Greaves. Yet here you are. Why?" Greaves stepped into the room. His clothing was plain, but his hands trembled with barely suppressed energy. "Because I have nothing to fear anymore. You see, I remember everything. Every lie Mortenson fed me. Every false memory he planted. I remember my mother's face, twice. Once as it was, and once as he made it." He pointed at one of the machines. "That is the mirror. A neural reflector, he called it. It shines a light not into the eyes, but into the soul. It burns away what is real and replaces it with suggestion. He thought he could heal minds, but he was making people, new people, puppets." "And you stole his research," Holmes said. Greaves laughed. "I reclaimed it, from the butcher who made me a stranger in my own skin." "You murdered him," I said. "Yes," Greaves said without shame, "and I would do it again. Would you not kill the man who stole your past?" A silence followed. Holmes stepped closer. "And now, what are you doing here, Elias? Creating more puppets?" Greaves's smile widened. "I'm freeing them. You see, Mr. Holmes, the mind is not a prison. It is a garden. One need only know what to plant." He gestured to a second door at the back of the study. "Come, let me show you my garden." The corridor beyond led to a wide chamber, its floor tiled in pale stone. Beds lined the walls, 8 of them. In each lay a figure, motionless, faces slack. Tubes ran from machines into their temples. The air buzzed faintly. "They were broken," Greaves said. "Trauma, delirium, pain. I gave them peace. I gave them new lives." "They're catatonic," I said. "You've lobotomized them." "No," Greaves replied. "They're dreaming." Holmes approached one of the machines, studying it closely. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "You were a patient, not a scholar." Greaves touched his own temple. "Mortenson gave it to me. He filled me with everything. His theories, his research. I remember it all. Every diagram, every word. I am his legacy." Holmes turned to him. "And yet you're still broken, Elias. You've not escaped the mirror. You've become it." For the first time, Greaves's smile faltered. His expression darkened. "I offered you understanding," he said. "Now I offer you oblivion." He reached for a lever, but Holmes moved faster. In a single fluid motion, he swept the nearest table aside and hurled it at Greaves, who stumbled, crashing into the control panel. Sparks flew. Machines screamed. The room erupted in chaos. "Watson, go!" Holmes shouted. I rushed forward, dragging one of the unconscious patients free of the tangle of wires. Greaves, recovering, lunged for Holmes, but Holmes was ready. He caught the man's arm, twisted it, and drove him to the floor. "You cannot erase the truth," Holmes growled. "Perhaps," Greaves whispered, blood at the corner of his mouth. "But I can bury it." A sudden burst of noise, a siren, echoing down the corridor. "Fire." "The generator," Holmes said. "He set it to explode." We fled. Smoke filled the halls. Somewhere behind us, Greaves vanished into the maze. We escaped into the night, dragging 2 of the patients with us. Moments later, St. Florian's exploded in a blast of heat and glass, the fire rising high into the coastal sky. We returned to London, exhausted and shaken. 2 of Greaves's victims would recover, though their memories were lost. The rest, we never found. The Yard declared the case closed. Greaves was presumed dead, but Holmes he was not so sure. "A man who can steal minds," he said, gazing out the window of 221B, "can steal lives. Appearances, even names. We may not know him when next we meet." I asked him then the question that had haunted me. "Holmes, could he have gotten to you? Could you have been changed?" He turned, his gaze piercing mine. "Would I know it, Watson? Would you?" The fire cracked in the hearth, and neither of us spoke again for a long time. Chapter 4. Echoes in the Fog. It is a terrible thing to doubt the solidity of one's own recollection, to feel the ground beneath memory shift as if one were walking upon a moor cloaked in fog, never knowing which step will be the one to betray you. Such was the atmosphere within which I found myself dwelling in the weeks following the conflagration at St. Florian's. Greaves had disappeared into smoke and ruin, and though the Yard declared him dead, neither Holmes nor I were inclined to accept such convenience. His was a mind too persistent, too tormented, and too cunning to perish without leaving a final mark. And it seemed that mark would come, not by telegram, nor body, but by dream. The first signs were subtle. Mrs. Hudson reported that I'd failed to greet her one morning when she brought my tea, though I distinctly remembered thanking her for the gesture and remarking on the late frost. Holmes, who had hitherto said little since our return to Baker Street, was suddenly possessed of an eerie stillness, as if waiting for some terrible note to drop. He resumed his old habits, playing long, mournful passages on the violin deep into the night, refusing meals, gazing out the window with unreadable intensity. One night I awoke from a most vivid dream, a child's voice calling out to me from the edge of a dark lake, and I found myself not in my bed, but standing fully clothed on the stairwell, clutching the revolver from my nightstand. Holmes was there, waiting for me. He said nothing, only nodded once and led me wordlessly back to bed. When I awoke the following morning, the revolver had been returned to its drawer. "You said once that a mind, however noble, can only take so much pressure before it snaps," I told Holmes over breakfast 3 days later. "I did," he replied without looking up from his paper. "Then let me ask you plainly, do you believe I have been compromised?" Holmes folded the paper with care and fixed me with that terrifying gaze of his, clear as a scalpel and cold as iron. "I believe, Watson, that someone or something is attempting to destabilize you. That you are a man of unwavering resolve and sound character is the only reason you have not succumbed already." "And do you believe that someone is Greaves?" "I do." He stood and fetched from the mantelpiece a thin folio he had been compiling since our return. He opened it to reveal a map of London, on which small red markers had been placed at seemingly random intervals, no fewer than 12. These are the locations of reported fugue states and inexplicable behavioral lapses, all within the last fortnight. Clerks forgetting their names. A solicitor found weeping in a gutter with no recollection of why he was covered in soot. A constable who claimed to be walking through someone else's dreams. But surely that could be explained. Fatigue, overwork, illness. Yes, Watson, surely. And yet, he handed me another item, a receipt, Requisition request, optical coils, induced reflection array. Delivered to Dawson Instruments, Limehouse. Recipient, Mr. Elgin Reeves. Elgin Reeves, I read aloud. An alias? Holmes nodded. An anagram, Eli arranged with barely a pretense. So he did survive. More than that, Watson. He is expanding. Holmes turned back to the map and placed a final pin in it. This one black. At the center of these occurrences, he said softly, is a modest warehouse on Shadwell Docks, officially leased for the manufacture of optical glass. Unofficially, it is the epicenter of a storm. We departed Baker Street that same evening. The fog returned with a vengeance, descending upon the city like a curtain of damp velvet, making phantoms of every gaslight and turning footsteps into whispers. Shadwell Docks had changed since the last time I'd walked its length. Where once there had been men laughing over crates of spices or shouting at tugboats, now there was only silence. The warehouses stood like mausoleums. Our footsteps echoed along the wet cobblestones, drawing the occasional glance from a passing sailor or a beggar huddled beneath a broken arch. The building in question was a narrow, 3-story structure tucked between 2 derelict shipping offices. Its windows were papered over, its door bolted from within. Holmes drew a small set of tools from his coat and made swift work of the lock. We entered quietly. The air was thick with the scent of burnt copper and resin. Machinery buzzed faintly beyond the far wall, muffled beneath sheets of thick canvas. The main room was dim, its floor covered with sawdust and discarded cable. Then we heard it. A voice. Not to be feared. The memory is clay, and the hand that shapes it need only believe. We crept toward the source, stepping carefully over coils and tools. A thin net of partition had been erected across the far end of the room. Through a crack in the wood, we saw them. Greaves. He stood at the head of a circle of chairs, each one occupied by a man or woman sitting in eerie stillness. Coils ran from each head into a central brass sphere, 20 inches in diameter, pulsating faintly with an inner glow. The mirror, Holmes whispered. He's rebuilt it. Greaves continued speaking. His voice was calm, coaxing. You were told who you were, but were you ever asked? Your fathers, your teachers, your gods, they filled you with fictions. But I can give you truth. I can make you real. The glow intensified. One of the subjects trembled and began to weep. Holmes placed a hand on my shoulder. We end it tonight. He moved to draw his revolver, but I stopped him. Holmes? Look. One of the subjects, a boy of perhaps 16, had begun to rise. His eyes were wide, but not vacant. They were clear, focused, and they were locked not on Greaves, but on us. Help, he mouthed. Then he screamed. The sound shattered the room's spell. The others stirred, gasped, looked about in confusion. Greaves spun toward us, and in that instant, Holmes burst through the partition, revolver raised. Not another word, he barked. Greaves froze, and for a terrible moment, I saw something I had never seen in the man before. Fear. You're too late, he whispered. The sphere's glow flared violently. No, I shouted. Holmes fired. The bullet struck the machine, not the man. Sparks erupted. A great keening wail issued from its depths, as if something living were dying. The subjects collapsed, unconscious. Greaves screamed and lunged for a hidden stare. Holmes leapt after him. I hesitated only a moment, then followed. The chase took us through back corridors and down into the bowels of the warehouse, where rusted pipes dripped and shadows slithered like living things. We emerged into an underground dock, a secret berth beneath the main yard. There, moored and ready, was a small launch. Greaves turned to face us, a pistol in his shaking hand. You can't stop the truth. He spat. No, Holmes said calmly, but I can stop you. Greaves fired. The bullet went wide. My own revolver cracked a second later. Greaves staggered, struck in the shoulder. He fell to his knees, gasping. Holmes stepped forward. You buried yourself in illusions, he said. You sought to erase pain by erasing identity. But what are we, Greaves, if not the sum of our suffering? Greaves's reply was a whisper. Free. And then he collapsed. Chapter 5. The Bleeding Portrait. The cold snap that followed the Greaves affair descended upon London with bitter finality. The Thames turned sluggish beneath a gray pall, and the chimneys belched with renewed fury as if warding off some unseen frost that dwelled deeper than mere weather. Inside 221B Baker Street, Holmes remained a creature of stillness and silence, a shadow of the man who had so resolutely pursued the case to its violent end. Though the sphere had been destroyed and Greaves imprisoned, something lingered. Not simply in Holmes's vacant stare or the fatigue that now clung to my bones, but in the air itself, charged, watchful. It was not over. We knew it. And in time, the city would too. The call came one fog-cloaked morning in early February. I had just settled at the breakfast table, the marmalade untouched and the paper unopened, when there came a series of rapid knocks at the door, a code I recognized as Lestrade's. Holmes looked up from the Persian slipper in which he kept his tobacco and raised an eyebrow. "Expecting trouble?" he murmured. "I believe it has found us," I replied. Inspector Lestrade entered like a man who had spent the night wrestling ghosts. His coat was soaked, his hair in disarray, and a thin tremor coursed through his fingers as he accepted the tea I offered him. "Something unusual, Lestrade?" Holmes asked with studied indifference. "Unusual?" Lestrade barked a hollow laugh. "I dare say I've seen men set fire to their own carts out of drunken mischief. I've watched politicians lie without blinking. But this is unnatural." "Go on," said Holmes. "There's been a murder in St. John's Wood. A Miss Eliza Hargrave, 24 years of age, no sign of forced entry, no valuables missing. But the scene." He paused to draw a long, ragged breath. "There's a portrait in the drawing room painted by the victim herself. It's her own likeness. Only," he lowered his voice, "only the painting appears to have changed." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes glittering. "In what manner?" "The figure bleeds." "Bleeds?" "From the eyes, nose, and mouth. Crimson oil dripping down the canvas. Fresh. Sticky. Yet no pigment on the brush, no damage to the oils. As if," he hesitated, "as if it were real blood." Holmes stood without another word. I grabbed my coat. We arrived at the Hargrave residence shortly after 10. It was a modest yet well-appointed brick townhouse nestled between rows of barren elms, their branches like clawed hands against the frozen sky. The constable on duty nodded us through. The interior was oddly warm, faintly perfumed with lilac. The body had been removed by then, but the absence was worse than the presence. An emptiness that seemed to echo across the high-plastered ceilings and polished mahogany floors. We were led to the drawing room, where the painting awaited. It was a remarkable piece, lifelike, almost uncomfortably so. Miss Hargrave's likeness stared out with gentle defiance, auburn curls tumbling over one shoulder, eyes a shade of violet that were almost unnerving in their vibrancy. And down her cheeks, blood. Not painted. Real. Thick trails of congealed crimson streaked the canvas, dripping slowly from the eyes and mouth to the frame below. I bent to examine the edge, where the droplets had landed on the wood. "They're wet," I whispered. Holmes was already at the fireplace, studying the brushes and palette set carefully on the nearby stand. "No crimson," he murmured. "No vermilion. No cadmium red. The last colors mixed were Prussian blue and ochre." "Then where?" "Not from the paints." He turned to the butler, a man named Finch, whose manner was grim but not shaken. "When was this painted?" 3 weeks ago, sir. Miss Eliza had taken to doing a series of self-portraits. Said she wanted to see herself from the outside. Odd phrase, I thought, but I'm no artist. "And the bleeding, when did it begin?" "This morning. I was dusting the parlor just before breakfast when I saw it. Ran to the room and found her. Gone. Peaceful-like. Sitting in the armchair. Looked as if she'd just stopped breathing." Lestrade interjected. "No signs of struggle. No signs of injury. The doctor says it was heart failure. But the woman was young. Healthy." Holmes's brow furrowed. "There is no such thing as coincidence," he muttered. We returned to Baker Street just after dusk, and Holmes plunged at once into the Hargrave family history. Within an hour, he had unearthed several oddities. "Listen to this, Watson," he said, spreading clippings and transcripts across the table. "Eliza Hargrave, graduate of the Royal Academy, resided with her uncle Rupert Hargrave, a former patron of Dr. Greaves. And here, note this entry from the asylum ledger at Beltham." He passed it to me. "Patient number 312, Rupert Hargrave. Treatment administered, visual induction protocol. Symptomatic reaction, involuntary hallucinations. Compulsion to sketch unknown symbols." Holmes's fingers drummed on the desk. "I fear we are witnessing the fallout of Greaves's secondary experiments," he said grimly. "He did not merely explore memory, he fractured perception. You believe Eliza inherited this instability? No, I believe she inherited something worse, exposure." He tapped another item, a letter, unsigned, recovered from her effects. "I see her in the mirror. She paints back. Not what I am, but what I become. The closer I get to the truth, the more her eyes bleed. I think she's me. I felt a chill. She saw herself being erased, or replaced, Holmes said softly. That night, I awoke again, standing in front of the mirror, my face pale, my eyes rimmed red. There was no dream this time, only silence. A blank where memory should have been. And on the desk, I found a note, in my own handwriting. Don't trust what you remember. Chapter 6. The Mind Thief. A man may survive the dead of winter. He may endure the deepest grief and even shoulder the burden of loss, madness, or war. But he cannot survive long without the certainty of self. Once that compass shatters, all paths become peril. It was a certainty that Sherlock Holmes and I no longer enjoyed. The note I had discovered in my own hand, "Don't trust what you remember," lingered before my eyes long after I'd burned it in the hearth. I did not tell Holmes. Not yet, for I feared the words too deeply to offer them aloud. I feared what he might see in my face if I gave voice to the doubt. Holmes, for his part, seemed to thrive on the disquiet. His eyes sharpened, his movements grew precise again, as though whatever had been dragging him toward despair since the Greaves case had been violently cast off. Something had sparked anew. But what he failed to say, what he refused to say, was more telling than his usual flourishes of deduction. It was Mrs. Hudson who first brought word of the second painting. It was early morning, and the streets outside Baker Street shimmered with ice. A thin sun had pierced the clouds, casting long yellow stripes through the parlor window when Mrs. Hudson tapped nervously at the door. "Mr. Holmes, I've had a letter." She held it out with a gloved hand, as though the parchment itself was toxic. Holmes took it without a word. The envelope bore no seal, only a smudge of crimson at the corner, as though someone had pressed their lips to it. Inside was a single page in cramped, slanting script. "The minds of men are not their own. You know this, but now you must see it. The painting is not the message. It is the lock. The theater holds the key." V.H. Holmes turned the envelope over again and drew out a second item, an old cabinet photograph. It showed a man seated in profile, gaunt, pale, with the unmistakable eyes of one who had seen something too large for the frame of human comprehension. The back was stamped with the mark of Wainwright's House for the Cognitively Afflicted, a defunct sanatorium that had once operated under Greaves's patronage. Underneath the stamp was a scrawled name, Victor Haldane. Holmes looked up. "We go to Whitechapel." Wainwright's had long since ceased operation, its iron gates now fused shut by rust, its windows dark with soot and grime. It stood like a forgotten monument to ambition and madness at the eastern edge of Commercial Street, dwarfed by a crumbling theater next door, the Euterpe, shuttered since 1891. We found the rear entrance to the theater unbarred. Holmes pried it open with a flick of his knife. The smell that wafted forth was not the dry mildew of disuse, but something sharper, like burnt copper and animal musk. "Recently opened," Holmes murmured. "Someone's been inside. Possibly still is." We descended a tight stairwell beneath the stage, where storage rooms once held costumes and props. Instead, we found a different kind of relic. The chamber below had been gutted and rebuilt. Copper wire ran like veins along the walls, leading to a central platform of polished steel surrounded by mirrored panels. Upon each panel was etched a different sigil, none that I recognized, though one bore a disturbing resemblance to an anatomical sketch of the human eye. And at the center of it all stood a single object, a portrait, much like the Hargrave painting, but older, more abstract. It depicted a man in a room with no doors, pressing his palms against a window that opened into his own skull. The signature in the bottom corner read, V. Haldane, 1889. Holmes examined it with gloved hands, then tapped twice against the canvas. A sharp clack answered him. "A double layer," he said, "something behind the oils." Using a small scalpel from his satchel, he peeled back a square of the painted surface at the lower edge. Beneath it, hidden behind the canvas and stretched into the frame, was a thin brass plate. Etched into it was a set of alphanumeric coordinates and a phrase, MIMEXIX, Final Iteration Instrument Lock 3B. Authorization. GRVS V.H. Holmes stared at it for a long moment. His face was expressionless. Then coordinates. Not geographical. This is Greaves's internal reference system, an index from his laboratory records, and Lock 3B. That's no place. That's personnel. Personnel? He nodded grimly. Patient 3 beta, the 9th iteration. Watson Greaves wasn't experimenting with memories alone. He was mapping them, cataloging them, as one might classify a species. I stared down at the plate. You believe this man, Victor Haldane, was one of them? No. I believe he may have been the first. We tracked Haldane to a boarding house in Hackney, where the landlady claimed he still lived, but only just. Comes and goes at all hours, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Eyes like coal and breath like old pennies. He paints all the time, won't show nobody. I hear him whispering to the walls. She gave us a room number, and we climbed the stairs. Holmes knocked once. No answer. Then again. Victor Haldane? Holmes called. We are not from the police. We know about Greaves. We know what he did to you. A silence. Then faintly, do you see it too? Holmes nodded toward me and pushed open the door. The room was a cathedral of canvases, dozens, hundreds, stacked and hung and strewn across the floor. Some were mere chaos. Others were terrifyingly lucid, scenes from rooms that did not exist, of people screaming in silence, of mirrors within mirrors within mirrors. And in the corner sat the man from the photograph. His eyes were darker than I remembered, but his expression, calm, almost serene. You brought the storm, he said softly, but it is not over. What is Memex 9? Holmes asked. What is in lock 3B? Haldane looked up. A mind, he said, but not just any mind, the original, the one Greaves made copies from. You're saying he extracted an entire personality? Haldane nodded. He built a lattice, a structure, then layered memories into it, like bricks. But it wasn't stable. It bled, infected others. Others, I asked. I see them, he said. In dreams. They whisper backwards. They draw pictures with no hands. Holmes stepped forward. Victor, did Greaves ever succeed in replicating consciousness? Haldane looked at us with wide, bloodshot eyes. No, he said, almost gently. Because it wasn't his. Whose was it? The old man looked toward the window. I think it was hers. We left the boarding house in silence. Night had fallen. The wind off the river carried the scent of ash and salt. Holmes's hands were clenched in his pockets, his face drawn. We must go to the archives, he said. The old Beltham files. If there is a patient 3B, we'll find them, I said. He shook his head. We must find her before she finds us. That night, I dreamed again. Only this time, it was not a place or a voice. It was a presence, watching, waiting. And when I awoke, the mirror in my room was fogged from within. Chapter 7. The Woman in the Mirror. There are crimes that strike at the heart of civilization. Blood upon the pavement, smoke rising from shattered glass, and then there are those subtle abominations which pass in silence, undetected, yet rot the very soul of reality. The further Holmes and I ventured into the detritus of Dr. Greaves's research, the more I feared we had stumbled upon one of the latter kind. It was not murder that chilled me now. It was memory, and the possibility that what I recalled as truth may not have been mine to remember. Holmes did not speak much after our visit with Victor Haldane. I watched him that evening in the lamplight, poring over Greaves's fragmented files like a monk deciphering a cursed codex. His violin lay untouched in the corner. The fire burned low, and his shadow, long, stretched, twitching, seemed to study him in silence. At last he spoke. I know who she is. The next morning found us in the musty sub-basement of the Royal College of Psychical Medicine, a forgotten archive of case records and patient profiles long since buried by scandal, disuse, and the death of credibility. It was Holmes who had acquired us entry under false academic credentials, and I, ever the willing accessory, stood beside him in the darkened stone room, our breath pluming faintly in the stale air. He held a single document in his gloved hands. Patient 3B, he murmured. Name, Adeline Branmore. The name struck no bell in my mind, yet Holmes's hands trembled, just slightly as he turned the page. She was a child prodigy, he said. Music and mathematics, committed at age 16 after claiming she could hear other people's memories in the wind. Madness? I asked. Or a mind so porous that it became sponge and conduit alike. Greaves saw potential. He passed me the folder. It contained a photograph, faded, ghostly. A young woman seated in profile, her head turned slightly, with intense, unreadable eyes and a delicate mouth pressed into some silent verdict. There was more. Drawings, diagrams of mental lattices, and one final page. Status, integration failure. Fracture event on day 104. Subject no longer retains stable identity. Subject exhibits reflection anomalies. Reported seeing observer's face in mirror. Last entry. I am not who I remember. I think she took me. I stared at the phrase for a long moment. Holmes, you don't think. She's still alive? He finished. No, I think what's left of her mind is. He knelt beside a locked chest at the back of the archive room. Using a rusted key we'd found inside the Branmore file, he opened it. Inside were only two objects, a cracked silver hand mirror and a metronome. The mirror's surface was strangely clear, as if it had never tarnished. I lifted it and saw myself, pale, grim, drawn, but then something flickered. For the briefest moment, I saw not my face, but a woman's. Back in Baker Street, we laid the mirror between us on the table. The metronome ticked beside it, a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Do you believe Greaves used her as a template for his memory experiments? I asked. Yes, Holmes said. He extracted her mental architecture, the scaffolding of consciousness itself, and copied it, over and over again. Every patient who came after her was built atop her imprint. That's why they all began to exhibit identical symptoms: bleeding portraits, mirror phantoms, identity collapse. She is the blueprint, and she's begun to bleed through. He paused. You've been seeing things too, haven't you, Watson? I hesitated. The dreams, the mirror, the handwriting. Holmes gave a small, grim nod. She's inside us. What do you mean? She was the first subject, the original data point. If Greaves' system worked, even partially, then every replicated lattice carries echoes of her, including those accessed during the Greaves investigation. Including, he leaned forward, you and I. It was then that I remembered the sphere, the infernal device that had taken Greaves' life and nearly cost Holmes his mind. We had both been exposed to it. Briefly, yes, but long enough. Holmes, I said slowly, if she's still within the system, within us, how do we find her? He tapped the mirror. She's watching. We bait her. We conducted the experiment that night. The metronome sat ticking in the center of the table, the mirror before it. Holmes had arranged the room meticulously, recreating the conditions from the Branmore case file. Low light, rhythmic pacing, minimal auditory interference. We each sat on either side of the mirror. I felt a faint nausea rise in my throat as the seconds passed, the ticking cutting through the quiet like a knife through silk. Holmes's voice was low, precise. Focus on your reflection. Speak the phrase Greaves recorded. I swallowed. I am not who I remember. The mirror remained still. I am not who I remember, Holmes repeated more forcefully. The mirror fogged, then cleared, and there she was. A woman, not in the glass, but behind it, watching from a space beyond the reflection. Her face bore no particular malice, only overwhelming grief. Her lips moved. We heard nothing. Then something changed. Holmes lurched backward, clutching his temple. Holmes! But he was not looking at me. He was staring at the mirror, staring through it. She remembers, he whispered. She remembers everything. I turned back to the glass. This time, the face that stared back was mine. But I knew it wasn't me. We broke the connection. Holmes was pale, trembling, but coherent. She left something, he said. A memory, a location. I saw it. Where? Downriver, an old Greaves facility. Riverside Asylum Annex. Abandoned in 1888 after a fire. But not destroyed. It's where she was born. It's where he built the first lattice. And you think she's gone back? No. He looked at me grimly. I think she never left. That night, I could not sleep. Not for fear, precisely, but because I no longer trusted what might happen when I closed my eyes. Already, I could not recall how the experiment had ended. Already, I saw a woman's hand, not mine, reaching for the lamp. And worse, I could not remember if I had written this sentence, or if she had. Chapter 8, The Lattice Room. The journey to the Greaves facility was not marked on any map. The path existed only in memory, a memory not our own, but seeded into our minds by the ghost of a woman who never truly died. Whether the images Holmes had seen in the mirror were hers, or merely a simulacrum burned into his psyche, I could not say, only that they were real enough to lead us somewhere. The building lay just beyond Limehouse, near the estuary marshes where the river met the detritus of London's forgotten east. We chartered a hansom cab to the edge of the docks and walked the rest. Holmes striding quickly, with a black oilskin bag in one hand and his revolver visible beneath his coat. The structure, when it came into view, appeared less like a hospital and more like a mausoleum. The sign, long since scorched by fire and time, read simply, Waterlow Isolation Annex, Cognitive Testing Wing. No birds sang. No wind stirred. Only the thick scent of rust, mold, and river silt clung to the building like a second skin. Holmes led the way with a lantern he'd prepared earlier. The door creaked open beneath his touch, its hinges so corroded they gave the illusion of resistance, yet ultimately bent to inevitability. Inside, blackness. The first corridor was lined with doors, some broken, some bolted shut. Each bore a painted number and a strange symbol beside it, neither alchemical nor linguistic, but something else entirely. "It's a memory map," Holmes said softly. "Not for places, but for states of mind." Greaves didn't keep physical records in this place. He organized thoughts the way a cartographer arranges lands. "How could he keep them here?" I asked. "He didn't. He stored them." We descended a stairwell that wound tighter and steeper than any fire code would permit. At its end, we found a corridor half flooded in stagnant water. Our boots sloshed through what may have once been blood or ink, now a gray smear that pulsed when the lantern passed over it. Room 3B was at the far end. The door was intact. Holmes hesitated, then reached out and turned the handle. It opened with surprising ease. Inside was a circular chamber lined with brass panels and glass tubes. At the center stood a large copper chair, half throne, half torture device. Around it were wires, crystal receptors, and strange, whispering machines that blinked to life as our presence activated some dormant circuit. Holmes circled it, eyes alight. "This is it," he said. "The Lattice room." He knelt by the base of the chair, examining the filaments that ran to a panel on the wall. "This," he muttered, "is where he did it. The cognitive imprints, the transfers. He used branched memory associations, stored in liquid crystal interfaces. This whole place is a library, and the subject, the mind, was the book." I approached one of the glass tubes along the wall. Inside was a floating shape, vague, incomplete, but undeniably human. A face, then a hand. Then nothing. "God help us," I whispered. "What did he do to these people?" Holmes didn't answer. He was removing a flat brass disc from a recess in the floor. It bore the same designation we'd seen in the mirror chamber, Memex IX, final iteration. "There's something else," he said. He inserted the disc into a slot in the wall panel. A low hum filled the chamber. Then a voice. Soft, distant, female. "This is Adeline, 9th session. He told me I wouldn't remember, but I do. I remember everything." The voice stuttered, warped. "I remember the room. I remember the others. I remember you. If you're hearing this, then the Lattice held. But you must be careful. My thoughts are not mine anymore. They've been touched." One of them escaped. Holmes's head jerked up. "He took the map. The real one. He thinks he can fix it, but he doesn't understand. Once you remember a thing that wasn't yours, it owns you." The voice cut off. Then the machines in the room shifted. A mechanical arm swung toward Holmes with surgical speed. He ducked, narrowly avoiding a needle-like probe aimed for his neck. "Watson, out now!" The chamber came alive. Lights flashed. The brass panels retracted, revealing faces behind them. Dead. Preserved. Their expressions caught mid-scream, as if each had once sat in the chair and left something behind. I grabbed Holmes's arm and we bolted into the corridor. The building itself now hummed with energy. The air shimmered with heat and sound. Echoes bounced along the flooded hall like whispers passed from cell to cell. We made the stairwell, up, up, the madness behind us rising with each breath. At last we burst through the doors into the marsh-lit night. Holmes stumbled to the embankment and retched. An hour later, in the safety of Baker Street, Holmes sat wrapped in his dressing gown, pale and silent. I poured him brandy. He took it without looking at me. "She's still conscious," he said. "You think she survived?" "No, not in any physical sense. But her pattern, her lattice, is intact, imprinted, and now fragmented across every patient Greaves touched, across the devices, possibly across us." He glanced at the mirror still sitting on the mantel. "She said someone took the map." I nodded. "The one who escaped." Holmes's eyes were sharp again. "Greaves's patient register. We're missing one." "You mean?" "Yes, the one who killed him. The one who took the notes. The one who's trying to fix what was broken." I stood slowly. "Holmes, you don't think it's Haldane?" "No," he said. "Haldane was the test, the prototype. But this man, this one was the successor, the one built to replace Adeline." He looked up at me, the fire casting strange shadows on his cheekbones. "And if he's trying to overwrite the source, then we are no longer hunting a man. Chapter 9. The Successor. The morning after our harrowing escape from the Waterloo Isolation Annex, a gray London dawn creeping through the fogged panes of Baker Street, I found Holmes restless, pacing as if the very walls could no longer contain his thoughts. The case, already so labyrinthine, had grown more unnerving. A man who had not only survived Greaves's experiments, but had thrived in their twisted aftermath. A successor, one who sought to manipulate memory and identity with godlike mastery. Holmes paused by the window and regarded the swirling mist over the Thames. Watson, we must locate this man before he alters more than minds, before he distorts reality irreparably. How do we begin to track a ghost born of fractured memories and experimental madness? I asked, rubbing my temples against an encroaching headache. Holmes smiled thinly. We find his trace in the one place where memory and identity are recorded. The hospital records, the asylum logbooks, the testimonies of those who knew him before he vanished. We must find his name, or his alias, or whatever remains of either. Our first stop was the St. Giles Infirmary, a grim institution, notorious for housing the mentally disturbed and forgotten. There, the staff spoke in hushed tones of a man named Elias Carrick, a patient admitted 3 years prior, known for his brilliance and terrifying obsession with rewriting the mind. Holmes and I sat with the infirmary's senior nurse, a stern woman named Mrs. Felicity Harker. He was peculiar, she said, folding her hands tightly. Brilliant but volatile. Claimed he could rewrite the self, a phrase no one understood until Dr. Greaves's disappearance made it a cruel reality. Holmes leaned in. Did he ever speak of Dr. Greaves? Or of the experiments? Mrs. Harker nodded grimly. Yes, he believed he was Greaves's true heir, that the doctor's death was a mere accident, and that he alone could unlock the full power of the mind's lattice. I shuddered. Did he show signs of violence? She looked away. The last patient to see him alive said he grew erratic. There was an incident. He escaped the ward, vanished into the city. The hunt for Elias Carrick led us through the murky underbelly of London, from opium dens in Whitechapel to the smoky back rooms of clandestine clubs where whispered secrets circulated like currency. At last, we caught sight of him in a dimly lit tavern near the docks. His appearance was disheveled but sharp, eyes that seemed to flicker with a dangerous intelligence, scanning the room as if it contained puzzles only he could solve. Holmes approached with measured steps, voice calm but commanding. Mr. Carrick, I presume? The man smiled thinly. And you are the persistent shadows who won't let the dead rest. Holmes and Watson, I've heard much of you. Your actions threaten many lives, Holmes said steadily. Your tampering with memories has caused irreparable harm. Carrick's eyes glittered. Irreparable? Or simply, transformation? The mind is a blank slate waiting to be written anew. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Dr. Greaves's research was incomplete, limited by mortal fear. I intend to finish it, to perfect the art of memory manipulation. Control not just recall, but identity itself. I felt a chill pass down my spine. Holmes studied Carrick carefully. And what of Adeline Branmore? Do you intend to overwrite her imprint? Carrick's smile twisted. She is a ghost, a fragment to be harvested. I seek to transcend her limitations, to create a mind unbound by pain, trauma, or decay. Holmes's gaze sharpened. At what cost? How many minds will you destroy to build your utopia? Carrick laughed, a low, unsettling sound. Only those who refuse to evolve. Our confrontation ended as abruptly as it had begun. Carrick slipped away into the London fog, leaving Holmes and me with more questions than answers. That night, back at Baker Street, Holmes mused aloud, he is dangerous, not only for what he has done, but for what he believes he can become. We face a battle not just for lives, but for the very essence of what makes us human. I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. And yet, he continued, in his madness lies a key. If we can understand his methods, we might find a way to restore what has been lost. The game was far from over. Chapter 10. Echoes of the Mind. The day following our unsettling encounter with Elias Carrick, I found myself haunted not by the visage of the man himself, but by the remnants of his victims, the broken minds and shattered lives he had left in his wake. Holmes, ever the relentless investigator, had arranged meetings with several individuals who had been under Carrick's influence, hoping to uncover the true nature of the successor's methods. Our first appointment was at a modest boarding house in the East End, where a woman named Margaret Keene awaited us. Her delicate frame and clouded eyes spoke of a soul battered by unseen storms. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she greeted us with a trembling voice. "I don't know if I can help you, but I want to understand what's happening to me." Holmes gestured for her to continue, his gaze steady and encouraging. I remember waking up one day with fragments of memories that were not my own. Faces, places, conversations, like whispers caught in a storm. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Holmes interjected gently, "And these memories, do they feel intrusive? Do they overwhelm you?" Margaret nodded, "Yes. Sometimes they feel so vivid I can't tell where they end and I begin." As she spoke, Holmes took meticulous notes. "Did you ever experience hallucinations or sudden changes in personality?" "I have," she admitted. "Sometimes I see people in mirrors who aren't there. Sometimes my own reflection feels wrong." The words sent a chill through me. It was precisely the symptom Greaves had documented in Adeline Branmore: mirror phantoms, identity collapse. Our next meeting was with a man named Thomas Grieve, a former patient of Carrick who had been admitted after a violent episode. "I can't trust my own thoughts anymore," Grieve confided in a low, gravely voice. "It's like there's someone else inside me, rewriting what I think and feel. I wake up not knowing who I am." Holmes's expression was grim. "Did Carrick ever speak of his experiments to you?" Grieve hesitated. "He called it the rewriting of the self. He said memories were like clay, malleable, shapeable, but he warned me it could break me." "And did it?" Grieve's eyes darkened. "I think it already has." As we gathered these testimonies, Holmes and I began to see a disturbing pattern. Carrick's method was not mere psychological manipulation. It was a form of cognitive engineering, a forced rewriting of identity that left patients fragmented and haunted by echoes of other selves. Returning to Baker Street, Holmes shared his latest hypothesis. Carrick's success lies in his ability to access and manipulate the memory lattice, an intricate web of neural pathways that encode identity. By altering nodes within this lattice, he effectively overwrites the self. "But at what cost?" I asked. "A cost borne by the mind itself," Holmes replied. "Each overwrite leaves residual echoes, fragments of prior identities that persist like ghosts. These echoes are unstable and dangerous, while causing the symptoms we've observed." He turned to a diagram he had sketched, illustrating the lattice concept. "If we can identify the core nodes, the primary anchors of identity, we might be able to isolate and restore them, repairing the damage." Our investigation led us next to the hidden basement of an abandoned East London clinic, rumored to be one of Carrick's experimental sites. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the lingering scent of chemicals. The walls were lined with faded charts and cryptic notes scribbled in Carrick's erratic hand. Holmes examined a series of glass jars filled with unknown fluids and what appeared to be preserved brain tissue. He experimented not only with mental conditioning, but with biochemical methods to alter memory formation. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed from deeper within the clinic. We followed it to a small, dimly lit chamber where a single figure sat, a gaunt man with wild eyes strapped to a chair wired with electrodes. "Who are you?" Holmes demanded. The man's voice was a broken whisper. "I am no longer whole. I am the echo." He reached out, trembling. "Carrick took everything from me and left this hollow shell." As we freed the man, I felt the weight of the tragedy, victims not only of physical violence, but of an assault upon their very selves. Holmes was resolute. We must stop Carrick before he fractures more minds. But to do so, we must understand his ultimate goal. I nodded, sensing the grim road ahead. Chapter 11. Fractured Reflections. The weight of what we had uncovered bore heavily upon us both as we returned to Baker Street. The success of Elias Carrick's mind-altering experiments was not merely academic. It was a profound and terrifying assault on the human soul itself. His victims were broken, fragmented beyond recognition, haunted by ghosts of memories that no longer belonged to them. And yet, the true nature of Carrick's final aim remained shrouded in darkness. Holmes sat by the fire, eyes fixed on the flickering flames, as if searching their dance for some hidden truth. I found myself drawn to the mirror over the mantelpiece, the very same mirror that had once reflected the disquieting visage of Adeline Branmore's imprint. It was as if the glass held secrets we had yet to decipher. "Watson," Holmes began suddenly, his voice low and grave. "We are confronted with a puzzle, not unlike the one Dr. Greaves faced. But where Greaves sought to understand the mind, Carrick seeks to dominate it. And in doing so, he has fractured not only his victims, but the fabric of their realities." I leaned forward. "How do you propose we find him before more damage is done?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "By using the very tools he employs against his victims. The lattice. If we can map it accurately, we might predict his movements. More importantly, we might glimpse the pattern he cannot hide." He unfolded a complex series of diagrams, interlocking webs of lines and nodes, each representing memories and identities we had collected from the testimonies and artifacts. "But this lattice is unstable," I observed. "How can you trust it?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely because it is unstable, it leaves traces, like cracks in a pane of glass. Patterns emerge when we know where to look." Our investigation took a surreal turn that night. Holmes, ever the experimentalist, proposed a daring approach to attempt a direct mental engagement with the lattice. Using a modified version of Greaves's apparatus, he intended to interface with the echo of a patient's memories in an effort to locate Carrick's own imprint within the web. I watched as Holmes prepared the chair, wires, and crystal receptors, the very instruments of madness now repurposed as our beacon in the dark. "Are you certain of this?" I asked, concern knotting my stomach. Holmes's voice was steady. "I must be. The mind is a labyrinth, but I have walked darker corridors. This may well be our only chance." He seated himself carefully, and I monitored the instruments as the apparatus hummed to life. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if pulled through a veil, Holmes's face changed. His eyes glazed, his fingers twitched. "Watson," he whispered, voice distant yet urgent. "I see. Fragments, faces, places. It's Carrick's mind, but twisted, fragmented, tortured." I leaned closer. "What can you tell?" Holmes's lips moved, speaking in a voice not quite his own. "He is trapped within his own lattice, battling echoes that refuse to be silenced. He fears us because in the depths there is something he cannot control." Suddenly, Holmes convulsed, a sharp cry escaping him. I rushed forward to release the clamps. His eyes snapped open, wild but lucid. "He almost lost himself," Holmes gasped. "The lattice fights back. It is alive, Watson, and Carrick's mind is a battlefield." As Holmes recovered, we realized that Carrick's attempts to manipulate memory had created a self-perpetuating nightmare, one in which his own identity was at risk of erasure. Yet, he continued to wield this destructive power outward, infecting others with fractured realities. "We must act swiftly," Holmes said, determination hardening his gaze. "Carrick's mind may be breaking, but his will remains dangerous. We need to find the source of his operations, his stronghold." I nodded, acutely aware that the line between hunter and hunted was thinning. Later that evening, I found myself staring into the mirror once more. This time, I did not see shadows or ghosts, but the faintest shimmer, a flicker of something waiting to be uncovered. The case of the stolen mind was far, far from over. Chapter 12. The Mind's Stronghold. The days grew shorter and colder, London's fog thickening like a shroud over the city, as Holmes and I prepared for what would be the most perilous phase of our investigation. The knowledge gleaned from the Lattice experiment left us no illusions. Elias Carrick was a man unraveling inside his own fractured mind, yet his capacity for harm only grew more desperate and unpredictable. We had discovered a thread. Several witnesses, patients, and associates of Carrick had mentioned a secluded property on the outskirts of Hampstead Heath, a place rumored to be the site of his latest and most secret experiments. Holmes's deduction was swift and precise. This would be Carrick's stronghold, the crucible where he forged his mind control techniques and concealed the stolen research papers that had vanished with Dr. Greaves. The approach to the estate was shrouded in mist as we set out early one morning. The gravel crunching beneath our boots was the only sound piercing the oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional call of distant crows. Holmes carried with him a leather satchel filled with carefully assembled instruments, a portable variation of Greaves's mind interface apparatus, field notebooks, and a revolver. My own weapons were less specialized, but my resolve no less fierce. "This place," Holmes murmured, eyes scanning the landscape, "is a sanctuary and a prison. Carrick hides in plain sight, wrapped in the illusion of normalcy, while his mind unravels inside these walls. We approached the iron gate, rusted but imposing. Beyond it lay a sprawling Victorian manor, darkened by neglect, yet still unmistakably elegant in its design. Ivy crawled over the stone facade, and the windows, many shuttered, gave the impression of watchful eyes. Holmes produced a key from his pocket, a cunning duplication acquired from an informant, and we slipped inside. The air was thick with the scent of dust, chemicals, and something acrid, perhaps burnt paper or worse. The grand entrance hall was a cavernous space lined with peeling wallpaper and tarnished brass fittings. Holmes's footsteps echoed as he led me through the corridors, each room revealing traces of Carrick's presence. Overturned chairs, scattered papers, and the eerie remnants of medical equipment. In what appeared to be the study, a massive oak desk dominated the room. Upon it lay fragments of Greaves's research, hastily concealed beneath stacks of books and stained parchment. Holmes knelt to examine the papers. "The missing notes," he said, voice tight with excitement and caution. "Carrick has been trying to complete Greaves's work here, using his own research as a blueprint." I scanned the documents, formulas and diagrams intertwining neuropsychology and biochemistry, alongside disturbing annotations in Carrick's frantic hand. Memory lattice unstable, identity fracture imminent, control essential. Suddenly, a sound startled us, a low mechanical whirring emanating from the adjacent room. Holmes motioned for silence. We crept toward the source, finding ourselves before a heavy door reinforced with iron bars. Beyond it, faint flickers of light glimmered through the cracks. Holmes carefully picked the lock, and we slipped inside. The chamber was a stark contrast to the rest of the house, a high-tech laboratory amid the decaying grandeur. Banks of electrical equipment buzzed and crackled, interconnected with cables snaking across the floor. At the center was a strange contraption, a chair wired with electrodes, monitors displaying shifting patterns of neural activity, and a cage-like apparatus designed to restrain a human subject. Carrick was there, seated in the chair, eyes wild and darting. "Ah, Holmes," he sneered. "I wondered how long it would take you to find me." Holmes stepped forward, voice cold and unyielding. "Your reign of terror ends here, Carrick. The damage you've inflicted on innocent minds cannot continue." Carrick laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Innocent? There is no innocence in evolution, only survival. I am not the villain. You are. You seek to preserve the past, while I forge the future." I felt a chill as Carrick's gaze fixed on me. "You do not understand, Watson. The mind is not sacred. It is malleable, a clay to be shaped. I offer freedom from the tyranny of memory, from pain, from the mistakes that bind us." Holmes raised his revolver. "Freedom at the cost of identity is slavery. You will answer for your crimes." Before we could move, the laboratory doors slammed shut, locking us inside. Carrick's expression turned triumphant. "You cannot stop the lattice," he declared. "It is already inside you, a seed planted by the successor. Soon, your memories will betray you." The monitors around us began to flicker violently, and the chair's electrodes sparked with unnatural energy. Holmes lunged at the control panel, attempting to disable the device, but Carrick pressed a hidden button, triggering a surge of electrical current. Pain exploded behind my eyes as my vision blurred. I staggered, clutching my head as fragmented images flooded my mind, faces from the past, distorted memories, whispers of doubts and fears. Holmes's voice cut through the chaos. "Watson, focus on me! You must resist!" Summoning every ounce of will, I grasped Holmes's hand and willed myself to anchor in the present. The electric surge ceased abruptly. Breathing heavily, I looked up to see Holmes struggling to dismantle the machinery. "We must destroy this device," he said fiercely. "It is the key to Carrick's control, and our only hope." Working quickly, Holmes tore wires and smashed circuits until the humming ceased, plunging the room into a heavy silence. Carrick sank back, defeated but unbroken. "You think this ends with me?" he spat. "The lattice is a living thing now. It will spread, infect, and control." Holmes stepped close, revolver trained on him. "Not if I have anything to say about it." As the morning light began to filter through the laboratory's grimy windows, the police arrived, summoned by Holmes prior to our assault. Carrick was taken into custody, his empire of fractured minds crumbling around him. Yet as I watched him being led away, I could not shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. That night, in the quiet refuge of Baker Street, Holmes and I sat by the fire, the weight of the day settling upon us. Carrick's mind may be contained, Holmes said softly, but the lattice, the idea, remains. The power to steal and rewrite memory is a temptation that will haunt us all. I nodded, gazing into the flickering flames. And the echoes, the shattered reflections of those who suffered. Can they ever be whole again? Holmes's eyes were distant, troubled. That is the true mystery, Watson. The mind's sanctity is fragile. We have glimpsed what lies beyond the veil, and it is both wondrous and terrible. Chapter 13. The Lattice Unbound. The capture of Elias Carrick had not brought the solace one might have expected. Instead, it seemed to have unleashed a new wave of uncertainty that settled uneasily upon Baker Street, like the London fog outside our window. Holmes sat in his armchair, fingers steepled beneath his sharp chin, his gaze fixed upon the crackling fire. I found myself pacing the room, unable to shake the uneasy sensation that this case was far from resolution. "You seem distracted, Watson," Holmes remarked without looking up. "Do you think the Lattice's menace has ended with Carrick's arrest?" I stopped and met his gaze. "No. If anything, I fear what you have hinted at. The Lattice is not merely a device or a technique, but a living entity in a sense, one that could spread beyond his control." Holmes nodded slowly. "Precisely. Carrick was a pioneer, but not the progenitor. The concept of manipulating memory has existed in whispers throughout history. Shamanistic rituals, hypnotic suggestions, even the darkest forms of mesmerism. The Lattice is a synthesis of all these, elevated to a scientific art." He leaned forward. "But now that the seed is planted, it could grow in dangerous ways, beyond even Carrick's intent." My thoughts drifted to the testimonies we had gathered, the fractured minds, the echoes of memories not one's own, the haunting phantoms in mirrors and shadows. How many others might have been touched, infected by this lattice unknowingly? How many more could be lost to the abyss? Holmes broke the silence. "I have been in correspondence with Mycroft. He shares our concerns and has directed agents to monitor known associates of Carrick. But this is a matter that may require subtler intervention." Before I could reply, there was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a letter. I recognized the ornate seal at once. It was from Inspector Lestrade. Holmes opened it swiftly. His brow furrowed as he read aloud. "Sir, we have received reports of unusual behavior among former patients of Carrick. Several have disappeared. Witnesses speak of a shadowy figure manipulating others, wielding influence with uncanny precision. We believe the successor's techniques are being employed elsewhere, possibly by an accomplice or disciple. Urgent assistance requested." The implications were dire. Carrick might be behind bars, but the Lattice, and those who sought to exploit it, were still active. Holmes stood abruptly, eyes burning with renewed purpose. "Watson, this confirms our worst fears. We must pursue this trail without delay. The Lattice is unbound, and its echoes threaten the very fabric of our society." We prepared at once to investigate these disappearances, beginning with the last known locations of the vanished patients. Our inquiries led us deep into the underbelly of London's forgotten districts, a network of narrow alleys, dimly lit taverns, and hidden parlors where secrets thrived. In a dingy backroom of a pub known as the Crooked Lantern, we met with an informant, a former associate of Carrick's named Jonas Creel, a man whose nervous glances betrayed a history of fear and complicity. "They're using the technique, all right," Creel whispered, voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. "Not for healing or study, but for control. There's a man, a patient of Carrick's, who's taken up the mantle, calls himself the architect. He's building a network, shaping minds to his will." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The architect. Do you know his whereabouts?" Creel shook his head. "Not exactly, but he operates from the shadows. Those who fall under his influence vanish, taken to a place called the Crucible. It's where the mind is broken and rebuilt." The Crucible. The name alone sent a shiver down my spine. Determined to confront this new threat, Holmes and I pressed deeper into the maze of London's darkest secrets, knowing that each step might plunge us further into a world where the mind itself was a battleground. Chapter 14. Into the Crucible. The name alone, the Crucible, evoked images of searing heat and molten metal, a place where raw elements are stripped to their essence and reforged anew. It seemed a fitting metaphor for the horrors we anticipated within. Our journey toward this secretive locus began in the shadowed heart of Whitechapel, a district steeped in grime and whispered secrets. Here, the gas lamps cast long, flickering shadows, and the narrow streets twisted like the convoluted pathways of the mind itself. Holmes and I traversed the maze with grim determination, following the scant clues Jonas Creel had provided. An unmarked door behind a dice-used tannery, a set of cryptic symbols carved faintly into the wood. "Notice the glyphs, Watson?" Holmes murmured, fingers tracing the delicate carvings. A cipher, no doubt, but one used by Carrick's inner circle to identify safe passage. I shivered, the chill not from the evening air but from the portent of what lay beyond. We slipped inside the threshold and found ourselves in a narrow corridor, damp and suffused with an acrid tang, chemicals, burning, and something indefinably sinister. The walls were lined with faded posters bearing cryptic slogans. Memory is malleable. Mind is power. Free yourself from the past. Deeper still, the passage opened into a vaulted chamber, a grim cathedral of science and madness. Here, the air was thick with the low hum of machinery, punctuated by whispered incantations from men and women seated before consoles and arrays of electrodes. Their faces were pale, eyes vacant or flickering with fevered intensity. Holmes gestured for silence and motioned me forward. "This is the heart of the Lattice's new empire, Watson, the architect's laboratory and prison." We moved carefully through the chamber, noting the strange apparatus. Tubes connecting brains to mechanical devices, swirling vapors in glass cylinders, and walls adorned with charts tracking neural pathways and emotional states. In the center stood a tall figure, draped in a dark coat, face obscured by shadows. He turned slowly, revealing a gaunt visage marked by a sharp gaze and a cruel smile. "You've come far, Mr. Holmes," the man said, voice smooth but edged with menace. "But this is my domain now. The Lattice is no longer Carrick's folly. It is my masterpiece." Holmes stepped forward, unwavering. "Who are you?" The man bowed his head with theatrical grace. "I am Marcus Traynor, once a patient, now the architect. I have refined Carrick's work, liberated from his madness and limited vision." I felt a cold shudder. Traynor's eyes glittered with fanatic intelligence. "You wielded power over my mind once," Traynor continued. "But I have seized the reins. Through the Lattice, I can shape society itself, reprogram its memories, its loyalties, its very essence. Imagine a world where pain, regret, and hatred are erased, where the mind serves a higher order." Holmes's voice was sharp as a scalpel. "And at what cost, Traynor? The sacrifice of free will, the destruction of identity?" Traynor laughed softly. "Freedom is an illusion, Holmes. The only true liberty is the absence of conflict within the mind. So I offer salvation, by any means necessary." Suddenly, alarms blared, and the room flooded with crimson light. Traynor raised a hand, signaling his followers who surged forward, restraining Holmes and me with swift efficiency. Despite their grip, Holmes's mind raced. "Watson," he whispered urgently, "focus on the Lattice. Remember what we learned from Greaves and Carrick. The key is disruption." I struggled against my captors, trying to recall the intricate details of the neural maps, the fragile balance between memory pathways. As the restraints tightened, a small device caught my eye, a control panel with a blinking red button marked Override. Summoning my last reserves of strength, I lunged and pressed it. A violent shudder coursed through the chamber. Machines sparked and groaned as power faltered. The Lattice's network began to collapse, its fragile equilibrium shattered. Traynor screamed in fury, but the staff began to falter, their concentration broken. Holmes twisted free from his captors, and together we surged toward the exit, dodging panicked technicians and collapsing equipment. The chamber shook violently as the Lattice unraveled around us, the very walls seeming to pulse with convulsions of fractured memories. We burst into the night air, gasping for breath as the building behind us groaned and trembled. Safe for the moment, Holmes looked at me, eyes aflame. "The Lattice is unbound no longer, Watson, but its echoes will haunt us for years to come." I nodded, the weight of what we had faced settling heavily upon my shoulders. The battle for the sanctity of the mind was far from over, but for now, we had struck a decisive blow. Chapter 15. Shadows of the Mind. The London dawn was reluctant that morning, a dim wash of gray seeping through the heavy curtains of Baker Street. The city seemed to hold its breath, as though sensing the tremors beneath the surface, those subtle yet profound aftershocks of the Lattice's collapse. Holmes sat at the window, fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the sill, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the fog-wreathed rooftops. I approached cautiously, still weighed down by the ordeal at the Crucible. "The Lattice may be fragmented," I ventured, "but your expression suggests you anticipate more trouble yet to come." Holmes turned, eyes gleaming with that rare intensity reserved only for moments of deep calculation. "Indeed, Watson. We have dealt a blow to its physical manifestation, but the Lattice is not merely a device or a place. It is a concept, a weapon of the mind that has already sown seeds beyond our immediate reach." He rose and began pacing, voice low but urgent. "Recall the patients who vanished, the subtle shifts in society, the whispers of altered memories, unexplained behaviors, and manipulated loyalties. These are shadows cast by the Lattice's tendrils." I rubbed my chin thoughtfully. "So the danger persists in hidden forms. How can we hope to combat something so diffuse and elusive?" Holmes smiled faintly, that inscrutable smile of his. "By understanding the mind's resilience. The human spirit, despite its fragility, is not easily subdued. The mind can reclaim itself, given time and the right stimulus." Our conversation was interrupted by a sharp rap on the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a telegram with a familiar seal. Holmes broke it open and scanned the contents. His face tightened as he read aloud, "Urgent! Multiple reports of influential figures exhibiting signs of memory distortion and behavioral anomalies. Suspected Lattice influence expanding within government and society. Recommend immediate intervention." The game was escalating. The Lattice's shadow was creeping into the very heart of power. Holmes and I resolved to delve deeper into the conspiracy, tracing the Lattice's invisible network as it infiltrated the corridors of Westminster and beyond. Our investigation led us to a clandestine meeting in a dimly lit private club, the kind of place where whispered deals and covert manipulations were the norm. There, among the elite and the enigmatic, we encountered Lady Eleanor Blackwood, a formidable woman with sharp eyes and an iron will. She had long suspected the Lattice's reach and was quietly organizing resistance. "You realize, Mr. Holmes," she said, voice steady and commanding, "that this is no mere scientific curiosity. The Lattice threatens the very foundation of society, our memories, our truths, our identities. We must act swiftly." Holmes inclined his head. "Agreed. But to strike at the Lattice is to confront a force that is part technology, part ideology, and part madness." Lady Blackwood handed him a dossier filled with intelligence reports and encrypted communications. "These are those we suspect of Lattice infiltration. Some hold positions of power, others influence through wealth and information." Back at Baker Street, the weight of the dossier settled heavily upon us. The Lattice's web was vast, its reach tangled and insidious. Holmes studied the files late into the night, analyzing patterns and connections. I could see the toll it took on him, the burden of knowledge that the mind, once corrupted, might resist restoration. Finally, he looked up. "Watson, the Lattice's ultimate weapon is not coercion but confusion. If people cannot trust their memories, their perceptions, society unravels." He paused. "Our task is to illuminate the truth, restore clarity before shadows consume reason." In the days that followed, Holmes and I worked tirelessly alongside Lady Blackwood's network to expose the Lattice's agents. We orchestrated a series of public revelations, carefully disseminating evidence and disarming misinformation. The climax came when a key figure in Parliament was unmasked, a man whose allegiance had been covertly altered through the Lattice's influence. Confronted with irrefutable proof, the man broke down, his memories fractured, yet fighting to reassert themselves. The victory was bittersweet. As the Lattice's grip weakened in the public sphere, Holmes and I knew the ideological war it represented would continue for years. The mind, though resilient, was vulnerable to such incursions. Holmes, reflecting on the case's end, said quietly, "The battle for the mind is eternal, Watson. We have only seen one chapter in a much longer story." I nodded, aware that in the shadows new threats would rise, ever hungry for control over the most precious of human sanctuaries. Chapter 16. The Last Reflection. The city was cloaked in a thick, restless fog as I made my way to Baker Street that evening, the weight of the case pressing upon me like the heavy air itself. The events of recent weeks had left an indelible mark on my mind, visions of fractured memories, stolen identities, and a labyrinthine conspiracy that threatened the very essence of human consciousness. Holmes was already awaiting me, seated at his writing desk beneath the dim glow of the gas lamp. His sharp features were etched with fatigue, yet his eyes burned with a resolute light, a flame that had not been extinguished despite the darkness we had faced. "Watson," he greeted, his voice low and contemplative. "Come, sit. It is time we reflect upon the journey and confront the ultimate truths this case has revealed." I settled into my chair, the familiar creak of wood beneath me oddly comforting in this somber hour. Holmes began, his gaze distant yet focused. "The lattice, as we have come to understand, is not merely a mechanism or a theory. It is a mirror, a reflection of humanity's deepest desires and fears. The hunger to control, to perfect, to erase pain, and the dread of losing oneself to forces unseen." He paused, fingers lightly tracing the rim of his teacup. We encountered not just a villain in Marcus Traynor, but a symptom of a greater malaise. A society eager to surrender autonomy for the promise of peace, a world teetering on the edge of self-manipulation. I nodded slowly, the enormity of his words settling over me. And the patients, the lost souls who became unwilling pioneers in this experiment? Holmes's expression softened with an almost imperceptible sadness. They were victims and unwilling architects of their own destruction. The lattice tore through their memories, reweaving them until the original self was but a ghost. The room seemed to close in as Holmes continued. Our victory at the Crucible was a turning point, but not an end. The lattice's ideology persists, manifesting in new forms of psychological influence, propaganda, even in the subtle engineering of consent. He looked at me then, intensity in his eyes. "Watson, the true challenge is vigilance, to safeguard not only the body but the mind from subjugation, to cherish memory, identity, and the messy, beautiful chaos of free will." I felt a profound gratitude for Holmes's insight, yet also a sobering realization of the fragility of the human mind. Later that night, I returned to my own quarters, haunted by the images and revelations. The question lingered. If memories could be stolen, altered, or manufactured, what anchored the soul? As sleep eluded me, I found solace in a worn volume of poetry, its verses reminding me that though the mind could be assailed, the spirit's resilience endured. Days turned into weeks. Reports arrived of renewed efforts to combat the lattice's influence, and public consciousness awakened to the perils of psychological manipulation. Holmes and I resumed our usual rhythms, our partnership a steadfast beacon amid the encroaching shadows. One evening, as the gaslights flickered along Baker Street, Holmes confided quietly, "The case of the stolen mind will long echo in the annals of human endeavor. But it is a reminder, our greatest mysteries lie within, and our greatest battles are fought in the labyrinth of the self." I smiled, pen poised to record this final reflection. The adventure was concluded, but the story, the eternal struggle for freedom of thought, was far from over. Epilogue. Months later, in a quiet garden far from the city's clamor, I received a letter sealed with a familiar mark, the lattice symbol, now carefully struck through. Holmes's words were brief but potent. "The lattice is broken, but not destroyed. Guard your memories, Watson. The mind is the last bastion of liberty. We must remain its vigilant sentinels." I folded the letter slowly, the truth settling like dawn's first light. The mind, stolen or free, was the most precious mystery of all. Thank you so much for listening to our Honoring Audiobooks original Sherlock Holmes adventure. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure.